The slap echoed across a room full of billionaires, and nobody moved. A woman worth $3 billion had just struck a man in worn work boots in front of his 8-year-old daughter, in front of cameras, in front of everyone. And he didn't flinch, didn't raise his hand, didn't even step back. He just looked at her calm as stone quiet as a grave, and said 4 words that made the most powerful people in that room suddenly feel very, very small. "Are you finished now?" What happened next changed everything. And the scar on his jaw. That's where the real story begins. Drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you're new here, hit subscribe. You won't want to miss where this goes. The morning Daniel Brooks drove into downtown Chicago. He wasn't thinking about billionaires. He was thinking about ice cream. Specifically, he was thinking about whether Emma would want chocolate or strawberry, and whether he could justify stopping at that place on Wacker Drive that charged $6 a scoop when the grocery store down the street sold an entire carton for $4.99. He was running the numbers in his head, the way he always did. The way a man raising a child alone on a government inspector's salary had to. When Emma pressed her face against the passenger window and fogged up the glass with her breath. "Daddy," she said, drawing a star in the fog with her finger. "Are we almost there?" "Almost, bug." "Is it gonna be fast?" "Should be. Promise." He glanced at her in the rearview mirror. 8 years old. Red backpack. Her mother's dark eyes and her mother's stubborn chin and a gap where her left front tooth used to be before she'd lost it 2 weeks ago on a piece of caramel. She was wearing her favorite sweater, the yellow one with the small duck on the pocket, because her school had sent everybody home early due to a heating system failure, and Daniel had gotten the call at 9:43 in the morning while he was already halfway to Sterling Tower. I had 2 options. Go back, get her reschedule the inspection, and explain to the building superintendent why a safety review for a reported structural anomaly in one of Chicago's most prominent skyscrapers would have to wait because of a broken heater at a second-grade school. Or take her with him, do the job in under an hour, and be at that ice cream place before noon. He chose Emma. He always chose Emma. "I promise," he said. She smiled and went back to drawing stars on the window. The Sterling Tower stood 52 floors above the Chicago River, and on that particular Thursday morning in late November, it was full of people who wore shoes that cost more than Daniel's monthly rent. The atrium alone was the size of a football field. Polished marble floors that reflected the light from 3 massive chandeliers. A reception desk that looked like it was carved from a single piece of black granite, and security personnel positioned every 30 feet in matching charcoal suits, like they were guarding a head of state rather than a building lobby. Daniel had been here once before 6 months ago for a routine walkthrough. He knew the layout. He knew which elevator bank went to the service levels, and he knew that the structural concern he'd been flagged about was on the 23rd floor, a load-bearing column in the Eastern Conference wing that a junior engineer had reported as showing microfracture patterns in the casing concrete. Probably nothing. Probably stress settlement from the building's age. But probably nothing was not how you did safety inspections, so here he was. He signed in at the desk, clipped his inspector's badge to the front of his jacket, and held Emma's hand as they walked toward the elevator. "This is a fancy place," Emma whispered, looking up at the chandeliers. "Don't touch anything," Daniel said quietly. "I'm not touching anything." "I see your hand moving toward that pillar." She pulled her hand back. "I wasn't going to touch it." "Uh-huh. I was just going to see if it was cold." "Emma, that's still not touching." He almost smiled. He kept it to himself. The 23rd floor was mostly empty when they arrived. It was a Thursday morning, and the executive conference suites were apparently in use for some kind of gala setup. Daniel had seen the catering vans outside, but the hallway leading to the eastern structural column was clear, and the building facilities manager, a tired-looking man named Walt, met them at the elevator and walked them back through the service corridor. "It's right here," Walt said, stopping at the column and pointing to a hairline crack running diagonally across the concrete casing. "I reported it last week. My foreman said it was cosmetic. I don't think it's cosmetic." Daniel crouched down. He ran 2 fingers along the crack's edge, feeling the depth, The direction, the way the edges beveled outward slightly on the upper end. "He's wrong," Daniel said. "This isn't cosmetic." Walt exhaled. "So what does that mean?" "It means this column has been absorbing vertical load stress that isn't distributing the way it should. You've got a transfer beam 2 floors up that's probably carrying more weight than it was designed for." Daniel stood, took out a phone, and photographed the crack from 3 angles. "I need to see the subfloor plan for this section and the original load calculations from the permit filing." "I can get those. You think we need to evacuate?" Daniel looked at the column again, looked at the ceiling above it, thought about the event going on upstairs, the catering vans, the setup crew, the fact that today was apparently some kind of significant gathering at Sterling Tower. "Not yet," he said. "I need more data. But I want those plans in the next 30 minutes, and I want to look at 2 more columns on this floor before I make any formal recommendation." Walt nodded and pulled out his phone to make the call. And that was the moment Emma said, "Daddy, I need to go." He looked at her. "Go where?" She gave him the look. The very specific look that 8-year-old girls give their fathers when the answer should be obvious, and also there is some urgency involved. "Oh," he said. "Okay." He looked at Walt. "Restroom." Walt pointed toward the far end of the hall around the corner from the main elevator bank. "Down this corridor, left turn, it's on your right. But that's close to the executive event floor. There's a gathering today, some kind of investor summit. It might be crowded." "We'll be quick," Daniel said. They were not quick. Not because Emma was slow, but because as they were walking back from the restroom rounding the corner into the wide corridor that connected the executive hallway to the elevator bank, the doors at the far end burst open, and Amelia Sterling walked through them like she owned the building, which of course she did. She was moving fast, the way people move when they have already decided that whatever is in front of them is less important than wherever they are going. She had 2 assistants flanking her, a phone pressed to her ear, and a coffee cup in her free hand. One of those large cups from the catering station, still steaming with a gold sleeve printed with the Sterling Infrastructure logo. She was talking rapidly into the phone, not looking ahead, gesturing with the hand that held the coffee in short, emphatic cuts that splashed the liquid slightly against the cup's lid. Emma was looking back at Daniel. She was asking him something. Something about whether chocolate or strawberry counted as 2 scoops or 1. And because she was looking back, she didn't see the woman coming around the corner. And because the woman was looking at nothing except the middle distance of whatever argument she was making on her phone, she didn't see Emma. They collided. It wasn't violent. It was the quiet physics of 2 people who weren't watching where they were going. A bump, a jostle, the instinctive stumble that happens when any 2 bodies occupy the same space. Emma's shoulder caught the edge of Amelia's arm, and the coffee cup tilted, and the lid flexed, and approximately 3 tablespoons of hot dark coffee arced through the air and landed on the left side of Amelia Sterling's cream-colored blazer. Emma gasped. The 2 assistants gasped. The person on the other end of Amelia's phone said something that went unanswered, and Amelia Sterling looked down at her blazer, then looked up and found herself staring at an 8-year-old girl in a yellow sweater with a duck on the pocket. The silence lasted about 2 seconds. Then Amelia Sterling said in a voice that carried all the warmth of a Chicago January, "What on earth?" "I'm sorry," Emma said immediately. Her voice was small and frightened. "I'm really sorry. I didn't see you." Daniel stepped forward. He put his hand gently on Emma's shoulder and looked at Amelia Sterling directly. "I apologize," he said. "It was an accident. My daughter wasn't watching where she was going. I'm sorry about your jacket." Amelia Sterling's gaze moved from Emma to Daniel. It traveled from his face to his jacket, the worn Carhartt with the inspector's badge clipped to the chest, to his work boots, which were clean, but not new, to his hands, which were the hands of a man who spent time in buildings under construction and not at investment summits. The assessment took approximately 3 seconds, and then something shifted in her expression. Something that had nothing to do with the coffee stain and everything to do with the calculation she had just made about who this man was and what category of person he belonged to. "Is this how you raise your child?" she said. Her voice was sharp now, pitched in a way that was clearly meant to be heard by everyone within range. And there were people within range, assistants, staff members, 2 security officers who had followed her out of the conference suite, a cluster of 3 investors who had come out into the hallway to check their phones. Running around a professional event without supervision, crashing into people. Daniel kept his voice even. She apologized. It was an accident. That blazer is worth more than you probably make in a month. The words landed like stones. Daniel didn't move, didn't blink. He kept his hand on Emma's shoulder, and he felt his daughter tense under his fingers, felt the way she pulled in close to his side, the way she went very still, the way she did when something frightened her the way she had that same posture he thought during the one thunderstorm last spring that had rattled the windows hard enough to wake her. "I said I apologize," Daniel said. "What happens next is up to you." He reached for Emma's hand, turned to go. "I'm not finished with you." He stopped. Not because of the words. He'd heard words like that before from people who used authority like a blunt instrument, from people who confused status with power. He'd heard far worse in far darker places from far more dangerous people. He stopped because of Emma. Because Emma was looking up at him, and he needed her to see what he did next. He turned back around. "My daughter apologized sincerely," he said. His voice was still calm. It was always calm. "I apologize twice. If you'd like, I can give you my contact information, and you can send me a dry cleaning bill. But we're done here." The corridor had gone very quiet. The investors had stopped looking at their phones. The assistants had stopped breathing. And Amelia Sterling had not become one of the most powerful infrastructure executives in the United States by allowing anyone to be done with anything before she decided they were done. She crossed the 3 steps between them, and she slapped him across the face. The sound of it was wrong. That's the thing. Nobody who was in that hallway ever forgot. Not the investors, not the assistants, not the security officers, not the catering crew member who had pushed open the service door at precisely the wrong moment and would spend the next 48 hours being interviewed by 3 different journalists. They all said the same thing in slightly different words. The sound was wrong. Too sharp. Too clean. The sound of someone who had done something irreversible and did not yet know it. Daniel's head moved with the impact, just slightly. His face turned perhaps 3 inches to the left, and then it turned back. He was looking at Amelia Sterling again. His expression had not changed. This was the part that broke something in the room, not the slap, but what came after it. Because every human instinct, every social script, every law of action and reaction said that a man who had just been struck in public should respond with either anger or submission. Those were the 2 available options. Those were the only 2 available options. Anger or submission. Fight or fold. Daniel Brooks did neither. He reached down without looking away from Amelia Sterling, and he found his daughter's hand in the dark of the corridor beside him, and he held it, and he looked at the woman who had just hit him, and he said, "Are you finished?" 4 words. No heat in them, no threat, no performance. Just 4 words from a man who had stood in places where the stakes were incomparably higher than this hallway, in front of people whose anger had actual teeth, and had made the same choice: stillness. Control. The discipline of a person who understood that real strength was not about what you could do to someone. It was about what you could choose not to do. The room did not breathe. Emma was shaking. Amelia Sterling stood with her hand still slightly raised, the follow-through of the slap frozen in the air, and something moved across her face. Something complicated. Something she would not be able to name for months afterward. Something that lived in the space between triumph and horror. "You don't talk to me like that," she finally said. But her voice was lower now, and something in it was wrong too. Some note of certainty that had been present 60 seconds ago was gone now, and neither of them could have explained exactly when it left. "I'm talking to you exactly like this," Daniel said. "And I'm asking you again, are you finished? Because my daughter needs to leave this hallway." Michael Grant had spent 26 years in security. Before that, he'd spent 11 years in the United States Army. And before that, he'd grown up in South Carolina with a father who believed that a man was measured by how well he protected the people around him. Michael had absorbed that lesson and made it his entire professional identity, first in uniform, then in the private sector, where the threats were different, but the discipline was the same. He was good at his job. He was very good at his job. He could read a room the way other people read text, scanning, categorizing, assessing threat levels with the practiced fluency of someone who had done it 10,000 times. He knew within 40 seconds of entering a space whether it was safe, and he knew within 20 seconds of meeting a person whether they were who they said they were. He came around the corner at a jog when his radio cracked with the code word that meant Ms. Sterling needed immediate security assistance. He pushed past the cluster of gawking investors, past the assistants, past the catering crew member who was pressing herself against the wall, and he moved toward the man in the Carhartt jacket with the full momentum of someone who had spent 37 years learning how to make other people move. He got within 6 feet, and he stopped. It wasn't the man's posture exactly, though the posture was wrong. Wrong in a very specific way that Michael's training had taught him to notice the stillness of someone who had been in real danger and learned not to broadcast tension, the relaxed readiness that wasn't relaxation at all, but its opposite. It wasn't the eyes. Though the eyes were wrong too calm, too measuring, too patient. The eyes of a person who had done serious waiting in serious places and knew that the moment would clarify itself when it needed to. It was the jaw. Specifically, it was the left side of the jaw. The scar. Michael Grant's vision narrowed to a single point. The scar ran from just below the left ear to the edge of the chin, thin as a wire, pale against the skin, old enough to have faded to silver. It had a specific shape, a specific trajectory. Michael knew this because he had studied that scar in photographs for 2 years after an operation. He was never supposed to know about an operation that had been classified at a level above his own clearance. An operation that had taken place in a country whose name he still did not speak aloud unless he absolutely had to. He knew this scar. He knew this scar the way you know the face of someone who saved your life. The way you know it, even when you've never actually met them. Even when their name was redacted from every official document and their face was absent from every file. Even when the only proof you had that they existed at all was the testimony of 6 men who had walked out of a place they should never have walked out of, and who all described in interviews conducted separately in different rooms in different weeks. The same man. The same build. The same eyes. The same extraordinary, inexplicable calm. And the scar on the left jaw. Michael Grant stood 6 feet from Daniel Brooks and felt something move through him that had no professional name. It wasn't fear exactly. It was the feeling you got when the world rearranged itself around a fact you hadn't expected, when something you thought was one thing suddenly revealed itself to be something entirely different, something larger, something older, something that demanded a different response than the one you'd walked in prepared to give. He lowered his hands. Amelia Sterling's voice came from behind him, sharp and incredulous. "Michael, what are you doing? Remove him." Michael did not move. "Michael." Her voice was harder now, the voice she used for people who weren't doing what they were supposed to do. "I said remove him." Michael Grant turned around slowly. In 26 years, he had never defied a direct order from Amelia Sterling. Not once. She paid him well. She treated him fairly within her own narrow definition of fairness, and he respected what she had built, even when he didn't particularly admire how she'd built it. But there were things that mattered more than paychecks. There were things that mattered more than job security. There were things you learned in uniform that stayed with you long after you traded the uniform for a suit. He looked Amelia Sterling in the eye, and he said quietly in a voice the whole corridor could hear because the whole corridor was listening, "Because you have no idea who you just attacked." The silence that followed was the loudest thing anyone in that hallway had heard all morning. Amelia Sterling blinked. The investors exchanged glances. The assistants held very still, and Daniel Brooks stood with his daughter's hand in his and looked at nobody at all. Just stared at the middle distance with those patient, unfathomable eyes and waited to see what the world would do next. Emma's hand tightened around his fingers. She was trying not to cry. He could feel it, the small tremors that ran through her when she was holding something difficult inside the particular quality of her grip when she was working harder than she should have to work at being brave. He squeezed back, 3 times slowly. It was their signal, the one they'd developed over years of doctor's appointments and school presentations. And one terrible day, 2 years ago, when she'd had to stand in a courthouse and speak to a family court judge about where she wanted to live. 3 slow squeezes meant, "I'm here. I've got you. You're safe." She squeezed back 4 times. 4 meant, "I know. I know. I know. I love you." He didn't look at her. He kept his eyes forward. But something in his chest moved in a way that had nothing to do with Amelia Sterling, or Michael Grant, or the small crowd of bewildered executives filling the hallway. "Dad?" Emma said very quietly. "Yeah, Bug." "Can we still get ice cream?" And in the middle of the worst and most complicated morning he'd had in recent memory. Daniel Brooks almost smiled. "Yeah," he said. "We can still get ice cream." The facilities manager. Walt reappeared from around the corner, oblivious, holding a rolled-up set of building plans and a folder of what were presumably the permit documents Daniel had asked for. He stopped dead when he absorbed the scene. The crowd of executives, the security chief who wasn't moving, the CEO with a coffee stain on her blazer and an expression Walt had never seen on her face before, the man in the inspector's jacket holding a small child's hand. Walt said. "I have the structural documents you asked for." A few of the investors looked at each other. "Structural documents," one of them said. "Yes, sir." Walt said, clearly wishing he were somewhere else. "He's the safety inspector. He's here about the column issue on 23. The investor who'd spoken, a silver-haired man in a charcoal suit, who Daniel would later learn was named Harold Fenn, a man who had invested $11 million in Sterling Infrastructure's current bond offering, looked from Walt to Daniel. "You're the safety inspector," Harold Fenn said. "Yes, sir," Daniel said. "For this building, for this floor, specifically for a load-bearing column in the Eastern Conference Wing that shows signs of microfracture stress distribution. It's not an emergency, but it needs to be addressed before the full event load of tonight's gala." He paused. "You might want to think about reconfiguring the venue layout for the evening. I wouldn't put 1,000 people directly above that column until I finish my assessment." Harold Fenn stared at him for a long moment. Then he looked at Amelia Sterling. And the expression on Harold Fenn's face was one that Amelia Sterling had never seen directed at her before, not in 10 years of building her company, not in 5 years of leading her industry, not in the entire arc of a career that had taught her that wealth and power were their own kind of armor. It was doubt, not anger, not judgment, just quiet, flat, irreversible doubt. "Amelia," Harold Fenn said carefully. "Perhaps we should—" "Don't," Amelia said. Her voice came out thinner than she intended. Because Michael Grant was still standing there. Because Harold Fenn was looking at her that way. Because Daniel Brooks was still holding his daughter's hand, still calm, still waiting, and that patience, that extraordinary, inexplicable patience, was doing something to the room that she couldn't control and couldn't reverse. She was a woman who controlled everything, and she could not control this. "This isn't over," she said to Daniel. Daniel looked at her, not with anger, not with contempt, with something that was almost gentler than either of those things, and somehow that gentleness was worse. "Ms. Sterling," he said, "I have a column to inspect, a report to file, and a promise to keep to my daughter. When I'm done, I'll send my incident report to the appropriate regulatory offices. You'll want to have your legal team available. Beyond that, I have nothing else to say to you today." He turned to Walt. "Let's go look at those documents." Walt nodded like a man who had just watched something he didn't fully understand and wasn't entirely sure he wanted to. And Daniel Brooks walked down that corridor with his daughter's hand in his, and the quiet certainty of a man who had been in places where the stakes were life and death, and had learned the only thing worth knowing, that dignity was not something someone else could take from you. It was something you held on to, or you didn't. It was a choice you made in the moment in the hallway under the lights with your daughter watching. He had made it, behind him in the corridor that had gone as quiet as a church. Amelia Sterling stood alone in her coffee-stained blazer and felt for the first time in longer than she could remember like the smallest person in the room. Michael Grant was still watching Daniel walk away, and on Michael's face, in the specific and complicated language of a man who had given his life to protecting others, was something that looked very much like reverence. Emma got her chocolate ice cream, 2 scoops, $6 a scoop. Daniel didn't even count the cost. The ice cream was chocolate, 2 scoops. And Emma ate it the way only an 8-year-old could, with complete and total commitment, as if the rest of the world had ceased to exist, and the only thing that mattered was making sure not a single drop hit the sidewalk before it hit her tongue. Daniel sat across from her at the small table outside the shop on Wacker Drive and watched her and said nothing. His left cheek still carried the faint heat of the impact. Not pain, he'd sustained injuries in his life that made a slap register somewhere below a mild inconvenience on the physical scale. But there was a different kind of sting that didn't live in the skin. It lived in the part of a man that remembered he had a daughter sitting next to him. It lived in the part that had felt her hand shaking inside his. He wrapped both hands around his coffee cup and let the warmth move into his palms. "Dad," Emma said. "Yeah. That lady was really mean." He thought about how to answer that. He thought about the easy answer, the one that let them both off the hook. The one that said, yes, she was mean. Some people are mean. Let's go home. He thought about the harder answer, the true one. "She was scared," he said. Emma looked up from her ice cream. There was a small smear of chocolate at the corner of her mouth. She didn't look scared. Scared people usually don't. She considered that with the gravity that 8-year-olds reserved for information they weren't sure they agreed with. "She hit you." "She did." "And you didn't do anything." "I did something," Daniel said. "I held your hand." Emma looked at him for a long moment. Then she went back to her ice cream. But she was thinking he could see it in the small crease between her eyebrows, the one she got when something was working its way through the machinery of her mind. He let her think. That was the job he had decided long ago. Not to have all the answers, not to explain the world perfectly, but to be present enough that she felt safe thinking out loud, even when thinking out loud led them both to questions neither of them could fully answer. His phone buzzed. He looked at it. Unknown number, Chicago area code. He let it go to voicemail. It buzzed again 30 seconds later. Same number. He picked up. "Brooks." There was a pause. Then a voice-controlled professional carrying the specific cadence of someone accustomed to being taken seriously. "Mr. Brooks, this is Richard Calloway, Deputy Director, Office of Infrastructure Safety, State of Illinois. I understand you conducted an inspection at Sterling Tower this morning." "That's correct. We've received notification of your preliminary findings regarding the eastern structural column on floor 23. I also understand there was an incident of a personal nature during your visit." Daniel looked at Emma, who had moved on to a very focused attack on the second scoop. "You could call it that. Mr. Brooks, I want to be very clear about something. You filed your inspection report through the official channel at 11:47 this morning. That report has already been escalated to my desk. Whatever occurred personally in that building today does not affect the validity or urgency of your professional findings. Are we clear?" "We're clear." "Good. I'd also like you to come in tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. There are some people who want to meet with you." "What kind of people?" Another pause. Longer this time. "The kind who knew your name before I told it to them." The line went quiet. Daniel set the phone face down on the table. Emma was watching him now, ice cream temporarily forgotten. "Who was that?" "Work stuff," he said. "You made a face." "I didn't make a face." "You made the face you make when something is complicated." He picked up his coffee. "Eat your ice cream, bug." She picked up her cone, but she kept watching him, and he thought not for the first time that she was going to be someone formidable someday. Someone with her mother's perception and something that was entirely her own. Some quality he didn't have a word for yet. A kind of clear-eyed attention to the world that didn't flinch and didn't look away. He hoped it would serve her better than it had served him. He hoped a lot of things. He drank his coffee and looked at the river, 14 miles away, inside Sterling Tower. Michael Grant was sitting alone in his office on the 31st floor, staring at a name he'd written on a piece of paper. Daniel Brooks. He'd written it 3 times. The way you do when you're trying to make something real that doesn't feel real yet. His hands were steady. They were always steady. That was part of what he was, part of what the Army had made him. 26 years of professional steadiness. But inside the steadiness was something he hadn't felt in a long time. Something that sat in the chest and pushed outward. He opened his laptop. He typed a name into a search engine, not Daniel Brooks, because he already knew that search would return a thin digital profile, a state licensing board entry, a couple of public records, nothing that would explain what he'd seen in that hallway. Instead, he typed a different sequence of words, a combination that would mean nothing to most people, a combination that to the right people would open a very specific door. The results were exactly what he expected, which was to say, almost nothing. A redacted Defense Department summary from 8 years ago. 2 lines of declassified operational text. A footnote that referenced an unnamed asset who had been instrumental in the extraction of 6 personnel from a compromised position in a classified theater of operation. Unnamed asset. Michael stared at those 2 words for a long time. He pulled out his personal phone, not the work phone, not the one logged to Sterling Towers' communications system, and he dialed a number he hadn't dialed in 4 years. It rang twice. Grant. The voice on the other end was graveled, unhurried, the voice of a man who had earned the right to take his time. Been a while. Colonel Reyes. You only call on the personal line when it's not a social call. No, sir. Talk to me. Michael took a breath. I need you to confirm something for me, off the record. Everything we say on this line is off the record. You know that. What do you need? The Hartwell extraction, 2017, Eastern Theater. Michael paused. The unnamed asset in the operational summary. I need to know if I'm right about who it was. The silence on the other end was the kind that had texture to it, not empty, but full of something being weighed and measured. Why? Colonel Reyes said finally. Because I was standing 6 feet from him this morning, and a woman hit him, in front of his daughter, in a hallway. And I need to know if my instincts are telling me the truth, or if I've been in this job too long. Another silence. Then, describe the scar. Left jaw, wire thin, runs from below the ear to the chin. Old, silver. The silence that followed was the longest one yet. Grant, Colonel Reyes said quietly. Sir. Your instincts are fine. Michael closed his eyes. He went private. Reyes continued, his voice dropping lower. Completely off-grid, by choice. After Hartwell, he put in the paperwork and walked away. The department tried to keep him, offered him everything short of a general's stars. He thanked them politely and left. A pause. He had a daughter to raise. Alone. Her mother died 8 months after the Hartwell mission. Car accident. Nobody in official circles made the connection publicly. He asked for privacy, and every person who owed him anything made sure he got it. Michael sat with that. The weight of it was significant. Colonel, he said. What he did in that hallway this morning, he just stood there. He just let her. Of course he did, Reyes said. And there was something in his voice that wasn't quite sadness and wasn't quite pride, but lived somewhere between them. You know why men like that don't hit back in situations like that, Grant? Tell me. Because they've already been in the situations where they had to, and they know the difference. They know exactly what it costs, so they save it. They only spend it when it matters. A pause. His daughter was watching. Yes, sir. Then that's why. That's the whole answer. Reyes was quiet for a moment. What are you going to do? Michael looked at the piece of paper with Daniel's name written on it 3 times. I don't know yet, he said. But I don't think I'm going to do nothing. That's the right answer, the colonel said. Call me if you need anything. And Grant, be careful how you handle this. Men like that don't want to be made into something. They just want to be left alone. I understand. No, Reyes said gently. I don't think you do yet, but you will. The line went dead. Michael sat in his office for 11 more minutes without moving. Then he picked up his jacket, walked out the door, and went to find Amelia Sterling. She was in her private office on the 48th floor, which was where she went when things went wrong, and she needed the distance of height to think. Her assistant had told Michael she didn't want to be disturbed. Michael knocked anyway, opened the door and walked in. Amelia was standing at the window. She still had the coffee stain on her blazer. She hadn't changed. He didn't know if that meant she hadn't thought of it, or if it meant something else. "I told Sandra I didn't want—" "I know what you told Sandra," Michael said. He closed the door behind him. She turned from the window. Her face was composed, the face she used for difficult meetings, the face that gave nothing away. But Michael had worked for this one for 9 years, and he knew the 17 micro-expressions she thought she was hiding. She was shaken. Deeply. "Who is he?" she said. It wasn't quite a question. Michael crossed the room and sat down in the chair across from her desk. He didn't wait for her to sit. She noticed. She sat anyway. "His name," Michael said slowly, "is Daniel Brooks. He's 34 years old. He lives in a 2-bedroom apartment in Logan Square with his 8-year-old daughter Emma. He drives a 2011 Ford F-150 with 160,000 miles on it. He holds a state certification in structural safety inspection and has worked for the city's third-party review office for 4 years. Before that—" He paused. "Before that is where it gets complicated." Amelia's eyes were steady. "Tell me." "Before that, he was a Tier 1 rescue operator, special operations multi-theater, the kind of role where your name doesn't appear in press releases and your deployments don't appear in family newsletters." Michael watched her face. "He spent 8 years in that world. In 2017, he was involved in an operation in a classified theater that I am not going to give you the details of. What I will tell you is that 6 American personnel were trapped in a position that had been compromised in conditions that made conventional extraction impossible, and that the decision was made at the command level to classify the situation as unrecoverable." He let that sit for a second. He watched it land. "Unrecoverable," Amelia repeated, "meaning they had been left behind." The room was quiet. "Daniel Brooks went back," Michael said. "Alone. Without authorization, without support, without a functional communication line. He went into a situation that his own command had declared unrecoverable, and he brought all 6 of them out." He paused. "Took him 11 hours. I don't know the details of those 11 hours, and I don't know if I want to. What I know is that 6 men are alive today who weren't supposed to be, and that the man responsible for that walked into a room full of military brass and government officials. When it was over, declined every accommodation they offered him, filed his separation paperwork, and left." Amelia Sterling said nothing. "He left," Michael said again, "because his wife was pregnant, and he wanted to be home for it. And then 8 months after their daughter was born, his wife died in a car accident on I-90 during a snowstorm, and he has been raising Emma alone ever since." The silence in the room was absolute. Amelia Sterling, who had an answer for everything, who had sat across from senators and foreign dignitaries and hostile journalists, and never once been without the precise sequence of words required to control the situation, sat with her hands flat on her desk and said nothing. "He came to your building this morning," Michael continued, "to do a job that incidentally may have prevented a structural failure during tonight's event that could have injured people. He brought his daughter because her school closed early and he didn't have another option. She bumped into you accidentally. He apologized twice, and you hit him." Michael leaned forward slightly. In front of his daughter. In front of 15 witnesses, 2 of whom had their phones out. Amelia closed her eyes. "The video," she said. "Yes." "How bad?" Michael thought about how to answer that in a way that was accurate without being cruel. He decided accuracy was the only currency available to him right now. "It's already been shared 4,000 times," he said. "It will be 400,000 by tomorrow morning, maybe more." She pressed her fingers to her mouth. "Amelia." He only used her first name in private, and only when things were serious. "I have worked for you for 9 years. I have respected the way you built this company. I have respected your intelligence and your discipline and your ability to make hard decisions under pressure. But I need you to hear me right now as someone who is telling you the truth, not someone who is managing you." She looked at him. "You hurt someone today who did not deserve it," he said. "And the world is going to know who he is before this week is out. Not because he'll tell them he won't. He'll go home and make dinner and help his daughter with her homework and not say a word to anyone. The world is going to find out because people like Colonel Reyes, people who owe Daniel Brooks something, are not going to let what happened in that hallway today sit quietly." "Colonel Reyes," she said sharply. "You called Reyes. He confirmed it." "You went outside the—" "Yes," Michael said. "I did. Because what happened today was outside the boundaries of what I would normally handle, and I needed to know if what I thought I saw was real." He met her eyes. It was real. She stood up, walked to the window again. Chicago spread out below them in the November gray, the river catching what little light the clouds allowed. "What do I do?" she said. Not loudly, not with authority, quietly, like a question she was actually asking. "That's not my job," Michael said. "My job was to tell you the truth. What you do with it is yours." "Michael." "Yes." "Have I always been like this?" The question surprised him. Not because it was unexpected. Somewhere in the back of his mind he had been waiting for her to arrive at it, but because of the way she asked it. Without armor. Without the careful management of perception that defined almost every interaction he'd watched her have in 9 years. He thought about the honest answer. "No," he said carefully. "Not always, but long enough that I think you stopped noticing." She kept her eyes on the window. He stood, buttoned his jacket. "I'll handle the security protocols for the evening event. I've already recommended to the facilities team that they relocate the primary reception away from the Eastern Conference wing per Mr. Brooks's preliminary recommendation." "Good," she said softly. He moved toward the door. "Michael." He stopped. "The 6 men he brought out," she said. "Do you know who they were?" "Soldiers," he said. "Just soldiers." "Are any of them—" "One of them," Michael said, "is currently the Deputy Chief of Staff for the Secretary of Defense." He left her with that. The door clicked shut behind him. Amelia Sterling stood at the window of her 48th floor office and looked at the city she had spent 15 years conquering and felt for the first time since she could remember that she had no idea what to do next. In Logan Square, 2 miles from the cold glass of her window, Daniel Brooks was reading to Emma. They were on the couch with the blue blanket they kept over the back of it, the one with the small hole near the corner that Emma had made 2 years ago, putting her finger through it absent-mindedly while she watched cartoons, and which Daniel had decided not to repair because she'd been upset about it, and he'd told her it was a feature now, not a flaw. That it was what made it their blanket. She had thought about that seriously for several seconds, and then decided he was probably right. "I was reading from the book." They were halfway through an adventure story about a girl who found a door in a library that led to a world where every building was made of books. Emma had chosen it. She had very strong opinions about books. I was 3 pages in when she said, "Dad." "Did you know that lady?" "The one in the building." "No," he said. "I'd never met her." "Then why did she hate you?" He stopped reading, turned the page back, set the book on his knee. "She didn't hate me," he said. "She looked at me and decided I wasn't worth being careful with. That's different from hate." Emma thought about that. It doesn't seem different. It is, though. Hate usually means someone's paying attention. What she did was... He searched for the word. Careless. She was careless with me because she decided I didn't matter. But you do matter. "I know that," he said. "The trick is knowing it whether someone else does or not." Emma was quiet for a moment. "Did it hurt?" she asked. "When she—" "No," he said immediately. "Then, a little. Not the way you mean." He looked at her. "The part that bothered me was you seeing it." "I wasn't scared," she said. He looked at her. "Okay," she amended. "I was a little scared, but then you held my hand, and I wasn't that scared anymore." He put his arm around her. She leaned into his side. "Good," he said. "Dad?" "Yeah. I'm really proud of you." The words hit him somewhere he hadn't expected. He kept his expression steady. He was good at that, had been good at that for a long time, but something moved in him that was harder to contain than he would have liked. "Why?" he asked. "Because you were nice, even when you didn't have to be." He kissed the top of her head. "Come on," he said. "Let's find out what's behind the door in the library." He picked up the book, but his phone was already buzzing again on the coffee table, and this time when he looked at the screen, he saw a name. He recognized a name attached to a number. He hadn't dialed in 4 years. A name that belonged to a man who worked in Washington in a building with very few windows and very specific clearance requirements. He stared at the name for 3 full seconds. Then he set the phone face down. "Dad, you're not reading." "Sorry," he said. "Where were we?" "The door," Emma said. "She's about to open it." "Right." He found the line. She reached for the handle, and the moment her fingers closed around the cool brass of it, she understood whatever was on the other side had been waiting for her for a very long time. He read the words, but his mind was on the phone. Because whatever was on the other side of that call had also, he suspected, been waiting for a very long time. The question was whether he was ready for it. The answer to that question, he already knew, was almost certainly irrelevant. Things were already in motion, and Daniel Brooks of all people understood exactly what it meant when things were already in motion. It meant the moment of decision had already passed. It meant the only thing left was to walk forward and find out what the world had arranged for you on the other side of the door. He turned the page. Emma curled tighter against his side. Outside Chicago moved through its gray November afternoon, indifferent and enormous, full of people who did not yet know the name Daniel Brooks. Full of people who by this time tomorrow would. And in a server room somewhere on the 14th floor of a building 3 blocks from Sterling Tower, a video file was replicating itself across platforms with the quiet, inexorable efficiency of something that had already decided it would not be stopped. 14 seconds of footage. A slap. A child's frightened face. A man who didn't flinch. 4 words. "Are you finished?" 14 seconds. That was all it took. The video hit 400,000 views by 6 in the morning. Daniel knew because Emma's school principal called at 6:12 to ask if Emma was all right and to let him know that several parents had reached out to the school with concerns. He thanked her, told her Emma was fine, and hung up before she could ask the follow-up question he could hear forming on the other end of the line. "Hi, Mata coffee." He stood at the kitchen counter and drank it while the city outside the window went from black to gray to the pale washed-out white of a Chicago morning in late November. He didn't look at his phone. He already knew what was on it. He could feel it the way you feel weather coming, a pressure change, something in the atmosphere that told you the world had shifted slightly on its axis overnight, and that today was going to be a different kind of day than yesterday. Emma came out at 6:45 in her pajamas with her hair going in 3 directions, dragging the blue blanket behind her. She stopped in the kitchen doorway and looked at him. "You made the coffee face again," she said. "I don't have a coffee face." "You do. It's the one where you hold the cup with both hands and stare at nothing." He looked down at his cup. Both hands. He set one hand down on the counter. "Did you sleep?" he asked. "Some." She climbed up onto the kitchen stool and folded her arms on the counter. "My stomach was weird." He looked at her. "Weird how?" "Just weird, like before a test." He moved to the refrigerator, pulled out the eggs. "You don't have a test today." "I know. It just felt like that." She watched him crack eggs into the pan. "Dad, is something happening?" He considered how to answer that for the length of time it took the eggs to start setting around the edges. "Some people saw the video from yesterday," he said. "The one someone took in the hallway." Emma was quiet. "How many people?" she said. "A lot." "Like our whole street?" "More than that." She absorbed this. "Like our whole city?" "More than that, too." She was quiet for another moment. Then, "Are they mad at her or at us?" He slid the eggs onto a plate and set it in front of her. "Most of them are on our side." "But some aren't." "There are always some," he said. She picked up her fork, thought about it. "That's fair, I guess." She started eating. "What do? We do what we always do," Daniel said. "We go to school, go to work, come home, eat dinner, read our book. Find out what's behind the door." "Find out what's behind the door," he agreed. She nodded slowly, like this was a reasonable plan. And for Emma, he thought it probably was. She had her father's ability to find solid ground in the middle of uncertain terrain, to locate the routine in the disruption and hold on to it. He didn't know if that was something he'd taught her, or something she'd come into the world with, and it didn't particularly matter. It was hers. She carried it like a tool. I was driving her to school when his phone rang through the truck's speakers. The name on the dashboard display read, "Callaway R." He answered. "Brooks." "Mr. Brooks, Richard Callaway. I need to move our meeting to this morning if you're available. There are some developments." "What kind of developments?" A brief pause. "The kind that happen when a video of a decorated federal asset being assaulted by a major government contractor goes viral before the Secretary of Defense's morning briefing." Daniel kept his eyes on the road. How did that characterization get into a morning briefing? Because Colonel James Reyes made 3 phone calls at 5:15 a.m., and one of them was to a deputy chief of staff, who is, as I understand it, personally acquainted with you. Daniel said nothing. "Mr. Brooks." Callaway's voice dropped slightly. "I want to be direct with you because I think you're the kind of person who prefers it. There are people in this building, serious people, people with significant authority, who feel that what happened yesterday to you constitutes more than a personal grievance. Sterling Infrastructure Group holds 4 active federal infrastructure contracts totaling approximately $2.3 billion. The CEO of that company physically assaulted a federal safety inspector in the presence of witnesses and on camera. That is not a private matter, eh? I filed my incident report," Daniel said. "You did, and it's being taken seriously, both the personal component and the structural findings." Another pause. "Can you come in 9 a.m.? He looked at Emma in the rearview mirror. She was watching the buildings go by with her cheek against the window, drawing invisible stars in the condensation. "I'll be there," he said. He dropped Emma off at school and sat in the parking lot for 3 minutes after she disappeared through the front door. Just sat. Hands on the wheel. Engine running. I thought about the Deputy Chief of Staff, Marcus Webb, a man he had not spoken to in 4 years, a man who had been 26 years old and terrified in a narrow concrete corridor, 11 hours into an operation that had been officially abandoned, a man who had looked at Daniel with the eyes of someone who had accepted that he was going to die and could not process the information that he wasn't. A man who had told Daniel somewhere in the dark and the noise that he had a daughter at home, 6 months old, named Grace. Daniel had said, "I know, let's go." That was all. Not a speech, not a declaration. "I know, let's go." He had not spoken to Marcus Webb since the debrief. By choice. Both of their choices in the particular wordless understanding of people who had shared something that ordinary language could not hold. But Marcus Webb had made 3 phone calls at 5:15 in the morning. And now Daniel was driving to a federal building to meet with people he didn't know about a situation he had not asked for. He pulled out of the parking lot. He emerged onto the expressway. He drove. At 9:03. He walked through the security checkpoint of the Illinois Federal Building on Dearborn Street, showed his inspector credentials, and was met by a young woman in a blue blazer who introduced herself as Deputy Director Callaway's assistant and led him to an elevator that went to a floor with no number on the button panel. That was the first thing he noticed. The second thing he noticed was that the conference room she walked him into was not a conference room. It had a conference table, yes, and chairs, and a credenza along one wall, with coffee and a fruit platter that nobody had touched. But the people sitting around the table were not the kind of people who attended regulatory meetings about structural inspection reports. There were 5 of them. He cataloged them in the 3 seconds it took him to cross the threshold. Callaway he recognized from his voice, a trim man in his late 40s at the far end of the table, with the careful eyes of someone accustomed to managing complicated situations. Beside him, a woman in a dark suit. He didn't know who was watching him with the specific attention of someone conducting an assessment. 2 men along the left side who had the posture of people trained to have posture. and at the head of the table in a chair, slightly removed from the others, in the way that people with actual authority sometimes sat, not performing distance, just naturally occupying a different gravitational field. Marcus Webb. 4 years. The man looked different, older in ways that had nothing to do with age. There were specific lines around his eyes that Daniel recognized, the kind you earned not from stress, but from weight, from carrying something that didn't get lighter no matter how long you carried it. But the eyes themselves were the same. They stood and looked at each other across 12 feet of federal conference room. "Daniel," Marcus Webb said. "Marcus," Daniel said. Nobody in the room moved. "Please sit down," Marcus said. Daniel sat. Marcus Webb looked at the others around the table. "Give us a minute." Calloway started to say something. The woman in the dark suit touched his arm. He stopped. They stood filed out and closed the door. The room was quiet. Marcus Webb leaned forward with his elbows on the table. He was in civilian clothes, dark jacket, no tie, but he sat like a man in uniform. "I saw the video," he said. "I figured," Daniel said. "Your daughter. She's all right?" "She looked frightened." "She was a little. She's resilient." Marcus nodded slowly. "She looks like her mother." Something passed through Daniel's chest. Fast. He kept his face still. "Yeah," he said. "She does." "I'm sorry I wasn't. I should have reached out. When Claire died, I should have—" "Marcus." Daniel's voice was quiet, not cutting, just certain. "We don't need to do that." Marcus looked at him for a moment. Then he nodded. The way people nod when they've been given permission to stop carrying something they've been carrying for too long. "Okay," he said. "Then let me tell you why I made those calls." "I'd like that." "Sterling Infrastructure," Marcus said, "holds a contract with the Department of Defense. Not just state infrastructure, federal. Specifically a materials contract for blast-resistant composite construction in 3 military installation renovation projects. Value $460 million. The contract is up for renewal in 30 days. He paused. "When the video came across my briefing this morning and I saw who was in it, I had 2 reactions. The first one was personal. The second one was professional." "Tell me the professional one," Daniel said. "The CEO of a company holding a federal defense contract assaulted a licensed federal safety inspector in the presence of witnesses and on camera. That is a material event from a contract. Integrity of executive leadership is covered under the ethics clauses of every federal contract we issue." He met Daniel's eyes. "I am not going to manufacture a consequence for Amelia Sterling because of what she did to you. But I am also not going to ignore a legitimate contractual concern because addressing it happens to affect someone who hurt you." Daniel said nothing. "What I need to know," Marcus continued, "is what you want." "I want to finish my structural assessment," Daniel said. "I want to file an accurate report. I want the column issue on 23 addressed before anyone is injured." Marcus waited. "That's it," he said. "That's it." "Daniel, the woman hit you. In front of your daughter. On camera. You could—" "I could what?" Daniel said. The words were not sharp, but they were clear. "I could let this become about me. I could let Emma grow up with a father who used a bad moment to build himself up. That's not what I want her to see." Marcus stared at him for a long moment. "You know," he said finally, "there are men in this building who have given congressional testimony. Men who have written books. Men who have been on the cover of magazines." He paused. "None of them are half of what you are." "That's a kind thing to say," Daniel said. "It doesn't change my answer." Marcus leaned back, let out a slow breath. "Okay, but here's what's going to happen whether you want it to or not. The video is already at 800,000 views. By this afternoon, it will be over 2 million. People are going to start asking who you are. Journalists, bloggers, people with microphones and angles, and the particular hunger that comes with a story that has a villain and a hero and a child in a yellow sweater." Daniel felt something tighten in him. "Emma," he said. "Her face is in the video," Marcus said. I've already had our media office reach out to 3 platforms requesting a blur on her face in future shares. We can't scrub what's already out there, but we can limit it going forward." He paused. "That's one thing I can do without being asked. The rest is going to be harder." "I don't want anyone." "Daniel." Marcus's voice was gentle but firm. "Listen to me. I understand what you want. I understand you want to go home and read to your daughter and have nobody know your name. I want to give you that. But there is a man who calls me every December on the anniversary of Hartwell. His name is Pete Galloway. You pulled him out last. He was unconscious. He doesn't remember the last 4 hours of that mission, but he remembers waking up in a field hospital and being told that everyone made it." Marcus paused. "He has 3 kids now. Oldest one just started college." Another pause, heavier. "He called me at 5:45 this morning, 45 minutes after I made my own calls. He said, and I'm going to read this exactly because I wrote it down." Marcus looked at his phone on the table. He said, "That man carried me through hell and I never got to tell him. He has a little girl and nobody is going to make him feel like nobody again. Not on my watch. Not on any of our watches." The room was very quiet. Daniel looked at the table. He pressed his hands flat against the surface and looked at them. The hands he'd had his whole life. The hands that had done things. He didn't talk about the hands that 3 times a week made Emma's lunch and packed it in a bag with a small drawing of a duck because she loved ducks, and because it made her laugh at lunchtime, and because that was the job, that was the actual job, that was the only job he cared about anymore. "Tell Pete," he started. "Tell him yourself," Marcus said. "He's in the building." Daniel looked up. Marcus picked up his phone and pressed a button. A moment later, the door opened. The young woman in this blue blazer stepped in. Behind her was a man about Daniel's age, shorter, built like someone who had once been very strong and still carried the memory of it in his shoulders. He had a beard and tired eyes, and the particular expression of someone who had been practicing a speech and had just decided to abandon it. Pete Galloway stopped just inside the door. He looked at Daniel. His jaw was tight. His eyes were too bright. "I don't have a speech," he said. "I had one and it was terrible." He stopped, swallowed. "I just wanted to say that I know what you did, and I know you didn't do it for anything except because it was right, and I know you don't want anyone making a big deal." He stopped again. "My oldest daughter's name is Claire. I named her after—" He stopped a third time. "My wife said to tell you, she said to say that her name was going to be something else, something completely different. And then I told her the story one night and she changed her mind. She just changed her mind." He pressed his lips together. "So, yeah, I don't have anything else." Daniel stood up. He crossed the room in 4 steps. He put his hand on Pete Galloway's shoulder. "You doing okay?" he said. Pete let out a breath that sounded like it had been held for a long time. "Yeah," he said. "Yeah, I'm good." He put his own hand briefly on Daniel's forearm. "Better now." They stood like that for a moment, 2 men in a government conference room in Chicago, connected by something that had no proper name, something that lived below language. Then Daniel stepped back. "Marcus," he said, turning, "what do you actually need from me today?" Marcus Webb straight in his chair. The personal moment was over. The man in the room was the Deputy Chief of Staff, again clear-eyed and purposeful. "Your structural report," he said. "Filed by end of day. Accurate, complete, nothing added and nothing held back. Done. A formal statement about the incident yesterday. Not for the press, for the contract review record. Also done. And one more thing." Marcus paused. "Don't disappear. Not yet. I know that's what you want. But for the next 72 hours, I need you to be reachable. Things are going to move fast, and some of them are going to move in your direction, whether you ask for them or not." Daniel looked at him for a long moment. "Emma gets home at 3:15, he said. "I am at that school at 3:10, every day. That doesn't change." "It won't," Marcus said. "And nobody approaches her. Nobody. Not a reporter, not a camera, not—" "Nobody," Marcus said. Firm. Final. Daniel nodded. He picked up his jacket from the back of his chair. Looked at Pete Galloway on his way to the door. "Tell your daughter," he said, "that her name is a good one." Pete nodded and didn't trust himself to say anything else. Daniel walked out. He was back in the elevator descending toward the lobby when he felt his phone vibrate with a message from a number he didn't recognize. He looked at it. The message read, "Mr. Brooks. My name is Amelia Sterling. I would like to speak with you. Not through attorneys, not through representatives. Directly. I understand if your answer is no. I'll understand if you don't respond at all. But I wanted to ask." He stared at the message for the entire length of the elevator's descent. 31 floors. Long enough. He put the phone in his pocket without answering. But he didn't delete the message. That was the honest truth of it. He didn't delete the message. And he stood in the marble lobby of the federal building and thought about why. And the answer that came back to him was not one he had expected. It was not about Amelia Sterling and whatever she needed from this situation. It was about Emma sitting on the kitchen stool that morning and the question she'd asked. What do we do? We do what we always do. But what if? What they always did wasn't always the only right answer. What if sometimes the door in the library led somewhere you hadn't expected, and the thing on the other side wasn't a threat, but an obligation, not to the person who'd hurt you, but to the moment, to the possibility that something important could be built in the rubble of something bad. He stood in the lobby and thought about Claire. The way she used to say that anger was just grief that didn't know where to go. The way she believed truly stubbornly with the conviction of someone who had chosen it rather than inherited it, that people were mostly trying and mostly failing and mostly still worth the effort. He thought about Emma's yellow sweater with the duck on the pocket. He thought about 4 words. Are you finished? And then he thought a different 4 words, quieter, more private, more uncertain. Not yet. Not yet. He walked out into the November air, across the city, in the Sterling Tower. Amelia. Sterling sat in her office and watched her phone for a response that didn't come. The video was at 1.6 million views. Her legal team was in the conference room on the 47th floor. Her PR director had sent 7 messages in 3 hours. Harold Fenn, the investor, who had looked at her with quiet doubt in that hallway, had requested a formal call at 2 p.m. She ignored all of it. She was reading a redacted Defense Department summary that Michael Grant had printed and slid under her office door at 7 in the morning with a yellow sticky note that read only page 3. Footnote 4. The footnote read, "Unnamed asset recovered all 6 personnel under conditions assessed as unsurvivable. Asset declined commendation promotion and continued service. Assets stated reason personal." Personal. She read that word 11 times. Then she looked at her phone again. Still no response from Daniel Brooks. She set the phone down. She pulled the coffee-stained blazer off the back of her chair. She had changed eventually, but brought it back. She wasn't sure why, something about not letting herself look away from it, and she set it on the desk in front of her. She looked at it. The stain was 3 tablespoons of coffee. Dry, now slightly darker than the cream fabric around it, shaped roughly like a small misshapen star. 3 tablespoons. The weight of a child's accidental stumble. The weight she was beginning to understand of an entire life's worth of choices about what kind of person she had decided to be. She pressed the intercom. Sandra. Yes, Ms. Sterling. Cancel the 2 o'clock with Harold Fenn. A brief pause. He's going to reschedule it for tomorrow, and tell him I said I'm sorry for the delay. A longer pause this time. Sandra had worked for her for 7 years and had never once heard her say that. Of course, Sandra said carefully. Anything else? Yes. Find out where Daniel Brooks's daughter goes to school. Sandra stopped. May I ask why? Amelia Sterling looked at the stain on her blazer. Because I want to know what kind of school it is, she said. What kind of programs they have, what they need. She paused. Don't contact the school. Don't contact him. Just find out. Yes, Ms. Sterling. She released the intercom. She sat in her chair in the quiet of her office and thought about 11 hours. The length of it had taken an unnamed asset to walk into the unsurvivable and walk back out with 6 people who were not his responsibility, not his obligation, Not anything to him except human beings who needed to come home. 11 hours. For personal reasons. She looked at her phone one more time. No response. She hadn't expected one. Not yet. But she left the message unanswered instead of marking it. Read the way you leave a door open when you're not sure whether the person on the other side is coming through it or walking away. Outside Chicago moved around them both in the November cold. A city that did not know yet that it was at the center of something. A story that had begun with a slap in a hallway and was becoming something none of them had planned, for something that was gathering weight and speed in the way that true things sometimes do. The way that moments of real consequence announce themselves, not with fanfare, but with the quiet, irreversible certainty of a door swinging open. On the other side of that door, everything was waiting. He was at the school at 3:10. Exactly. He always was. The other parents knew him the way you know, someone you see every day without ever really knowing them. His name, his face, the worn Carhartt jacket, the truck that needed a new muffler and sounded like it was clearing its throat every time he pulled into the pickup lane. A few of them had smiled at him differently today. Not mean, not cruel. The way people smile when they've seen something about you that changed the dimensions of who they thought you were. He didn't love it, but he understood it. Emma came through the door at 3:17. Her backpack was lopsided the way it always was when she crammed too many library books into it. She found him immediately in the crowd, the way she always did, some internal compass that had been calibrated to his frequency since the day she could walk, and she crossed the sidewalk and wrapped both arms around his waist and pressed her face into his jacket. He put his hand on the back of her head. "How was it?" he said. "People kept asking me about the video," she said, her voice muffled by his jacket. "What did you say?" "I said my dad was fine, and also could we please do math now?" He almost laughed. "That's exactly right." She pulled back and looked up at him. "Are you fine?" "I'm fine, Bug." "You have the face again." "I don't have a face." "You have 17 faces," she said seriously, "and today is number 11. That's the one where you're thinking about something hard, but you don't want to make me worry." He looked at her for a moment. "When did you start counting my faces?" "A while ago," she said, as if this were perfectly normal. "Come on, I'm hungry." He took her backpack. They walked to the truck. He had made his decision somewhere between the federal building and the school. He had turned it over for 4 hours in the truck during the structural assessment he'd completed on the building at 2 p.m. during the 10 minutes he'd sat in the parking lot of a Walgreens eating a granola bar because he'd forgotten to eat lunch. He had examined it from every angle. He knew how to examine things, which was the same way he'd been trained to assess hostile environments. Look for what's really there, not what you want to see. And what was really there was a woman who had sent him a message asking to speak directly, and a daughter who was going to grow up watching how he handled things. He texted Amelia Sterling back at 3:45, sitting in the school pickup lane with the truck running. He typed, "Tomorrow, 7 a.m. The coffee place on Milwaukee Ave called Alma's. I have 45 minutes. He hit send before he could think about it too long. The response came in 4 minutes. 3 words, "I'll be there." He set the phone down. Emma was eating a granola bar from the glove compartment and reading a library book about deep-sea fish that she had not, as far as he could tell, checked out through any official channel. "Emma," he said, "did you borrow that book or take it?" "Borrow," she said, not looking up. "From the library." "From Jacob Reiner. He said I could." "Does Jacob Reiner know you have it?" A brief pause. "He will when he looks for it." "Emma, I'm going to give it back. Tomorrow." "Tomorrow," she agreed cheerfully. He pulled out of the parking lane and into traffic, and somewhere in his chest, the tight thing that had been there since 6 in the morning loosened just slightly, the way it always did when the day came back to this. The truck, the granola bar, the borrowed book, the gap-toothed smile, the small human being who was the most important thing he had ever done and would ever do. He could handle tomorrow. He always could. By 8 p.m., the video had crossed 2 million views. By 9:30, it was at 3.4 million, and a journalist from the Chicago Tribune had published a piece with the headline, "Who is the man in the Sterling Tower video?" The article had no real answer. His name had not yet leaked from any official source. But the internet was doing what the internet did, assembling fragments, crowdsourcing identity, working the puzzle with the focused energy of people who believed that everyone could be found if you looked hard enough. Daniel turned his phone off at 9:45 after Emma was asleep. He stood in the doorway of her room for a moment, the way he did every night, the specific ritual of a parent, confirming that the most important thing is still in its place, still breathing, still safe. He went to bed. He did not sleep well. At 5 a.m. he gave up pretending and made coffee. At 6:45, he dropped Emma at the neighbors, the Kowalski family next door, whose daughter Rosa was Emma's best friend, whose mother Janet had appeared at his door at 7 p.m. the previous evening with a foil-covered pan of lasagna and the words, "I saw the video, don't argue with me, take the food." He had taken the food. He had thanked her. He had thought not for the first time that the neighborhood he lived in was full of people who understood the specific quiet language of showing up. At 6:58, he walked into Alma's Coffee on Milwaukee Avenue. At 6:59, Amelia Sterling was already there. She was sitting at the table farthest from the door, back to the wall, wearing a dark coat, no blazer, no visible corporate armor. She had a coffee in front of her that she hadn't touched. She looked like a woman who had not slept. Not in the way of someone who'd had a long night, but in the way of someone who'd spent the dark hours in close company with thoughts that didn't offer any rest. She saw him come in. She straightened slightly. Her hands moved from the table to her lap and back. He ordered at the counter. He took his coffee to her table and sat down. They looked at each other. "Thank you for coming," she said. "You have 44 minutes," he said. She nodded, took a breath. He could see her deciding which version of this speech to give: the managed version, the controlled version, the version she had probably rehearsed in the car on the way over. He watched the decision happen on her face, the way a person arrives at the edge of something and looks down. She chose the unmanaged version. "I don't know how to do this," she said. "I'm going to be honest about that up front, because I think you'll know immediately if I'm not being honest. And I'd rather admit the limitation than have you see through me halfway through and stop listening." "Okay," he said. "I've been thinking all night about why I did what I did," she said. Not as an excuse, just trying to understand it myself. She looked at her coffee. "I came up with a lot of answers. Some of them are about the pressure I was under that morning. Some of them are about the kind of environment I've built around myself, where no one ever—" She stopped. "None of those answers are satisfying because none of them are actually the point." "What's the point?" he said. She looked up. "The point is that I looked at you and I decided in about 4 seconds that you didn't matter. That's the real answer. Not the stress, not the blazer, not the event. I looked at a man and I made a judgment about his worth based on what he was wearing, and I treated him accordingly." She paused. "And then I looked at your daughter's face after I did it." The coffee shop moved around them. The barista called someone's name. A chair scraped. "How old is your daughter?" Daniel asked. Amelia blinked. I don't have children." "Okay," he said. "I've thought about it," she said. It wasn't the right time, and then more time passed." She stopped. "That's not relevant." "It might be," Daniel said. "But go ahead." She wrapped her hands around her coffee cup. "I want to apologize. I know that word is insufficient. I know there isn't a version of an apology that accounts for what I did in front of your daughter, for putting my hands on you, for—" Her voice dropped. "I know what you were. What you did. Michael told me. I've been reading everything I can find, which isn't much, because you made sure there wasn't much to find." She paused. "A man who did what you did, who walked away from all of it to raise his daughter, and I stood in my hallway and treated him like he was less than nothing." Her jaw was tight. "I've spent 15 years building a company. I've been in rooms with presidents. I've negotiated with people who wanted to destroy everything I built, and I held the line and I won. And somehow, in the middle of all of it," she stopped. "I lost something I didn't notice I was losing." Daniel drank his coffee. He set it down. "What do you want from this meeting?" he said. "Nothing," she said. "I don't want anything. I wanted to say that to you directly. I wanted you to hear it from me, and not from a lawyer or a statement." "All right," he said. She waited. "That's it." "What else should I say?" "I don't know. I expected." "You expected anger," he said. "Or something." "Yes." She shook her head. "You're not angry." "I was," he said. "Not for the reason you might think. What you did to me." He paused. "I've had worse. I've been in situations where a slap would have been a significant improvement. What I was angry about was my daughter." He looked at her directly. She was frightened. She had to feel that. I didn't want that for her. Amelia was quiet for a moment. "Michael told me about your wife," she said carefully. Daniel's expression didn't change, but something shifted in the quality of his stillness, a deeper quiet, the kind that forms around things that are very heavy. "He shouldn't have," Daniel said. "He did it to give me context, not to manipulate the conversation. I think he felt I needed to understand the full weight of what I'd done." She hesitated. "I'm sorry, for that too, for all of it." "Claire died 4 years ago," Daniel said. "In a snowstorm on the 90. Emma was 8 months old. She doesn't have any memory of her mother." He said it the way he said all true things, simply without performance. "I have photographs everywhere in our apartment. I talk about her. Emma knows who her mother was. She knows her mother loved her." He paused. "That's what I can give her. The rest, the fact that she doesn't have a mother at school pickups and birthday parties and the first day of high school, that's just the truth of it. I don't spend a lot of time being angry about it, because being angry doesn't change it." Amelia looked at him. "How do you do that?" she said. "Do what?" "Carry all of it, and still you were calm in that hallway. You were calm in front of me in this coffee shop. How is that possible?" He thought about it honestly. "My wife used to say that anger is grief that doesn't know where to go. I think about that a lot. When I feel myself moving toward something destructive, I ask myself where the grief is actually supposed to go, and usually the answer is toward Emma, into making her lunch, into reading to her at night, into being at the school at 3:10. He paused. "That's not nothing. That's actually everything." Amelia Sterling looked at her hands. Something moved across her face, slow, tectonic, the kind of shift that happens below the surface before it shows anywhere visible. "I've been doing this wrong for a long time," she said quietly. "Probably," Daniel said. "Not cruel, just honest." She looked up sharply, and then unexpected she almost smiled. Because it was honest. Because it was the first purely honest thing anyone had said to her in longer than she could remember. "What do you want, Mr. Brooks?" she said. "Not from this conversation, from your life. What do you actually want?" He considered that. He gave it the same weight he gave everything genuine, deliberate consideration. "I want Emma to have a good childhood," he said. "I want her to feel safe and curious and loved. I want to be at the school at 3:10 until she tells me she's too old for pickups, and then I want to park down the street and wait there instead." He paused. "I want to do my job well. I want to make sure buildings are safe, and that the people inside them can trust the structure they're standing in." He looked at her. "That's actually it. That's a remarkably small list for a man with your history." "My history is behind me," he said. "Emma is in front of me." Amelia was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "I want to fund her school." Daniel went still. "Not as payment," she said quickly. "Not as a transaction. Not because I think I can buy my way out of this. I had Sandra research the school. It's a public school in Logan Square. Good teachers. Not enough resources. The kind of place that buys its own supplies and runs fundraisers for things that should be in the budget." She met his eyes. "I want to create an anonymous endowment. No branding, no press, no Sterling Infrastructure logo anywhere near it. Just money that helps kids get what they need." She paused. "I would have found the school regardless of what happened yesterday. That's what I told myself last night until I realized that was a lie and stopped. But the fact that it starts here, I want that to mean something. Even if you're the only person who knows where it comes from." Daniel studied her. He looked at her the way he looked at structural reports, searching for the flaw, for the hairline crack, for the thing that was presenting as solid, but showing signs of stress. He didn't find it. Anonymous, he said, Ed. Completely. No press, no statement, no mention of my daughter. None. If I ever find out there's a plaque or a press release or a single mention of her name in any context related to your company, there won't be, she said. You have my word, and I understand completely what my word is worth to you right now. I'm giving it anyway. He drank the last of his coffee. I'm not forgiving you today, he said. I want to be honest about that. That's not where I am, and I don't think you've earned it yet. I know, she said. But I'm also not going to hold this in a way that makes it heavier than it needs to be, he said. What you did was wrong. You know that. The consequences of it are going to follow you regardless of what I do or don't do. That's between you and the world. He paused. What you do next, what you build from it, that's the only part that matters to me. What would you want to see? She said. I want to see you become someone Emma could look up to, he said. Not because of what you have or what you built, because of who you decide to be going forward. He paused. She's 8. She's paying attention. She's going to grow up in a world full of powerful people. I want her to have examples of what real power looks like, the kind that doesn't need to take anything from anyone. He looked at Amelia Sterling across the small table. You could be that, or you couldn't. That's yours. The coffee shop moved around them. Amelia Sterling sat with those words. She had sat across from senators. She had faced hostile boards and aggressive journalists and investment committees who wanted her to fail. She had navigated every version of difficult conversation that existed in the professional world, and she had never once been made to feel the way she felt right now. Not diminished, not humiliated, but seen. Clearly and completely, and without any particular malice, just seen the way you see a structure, when you know exactly where the stress is distributed and where it isn't. I'm going to try, she said. That's all I can say honestly. I'm going to try. That's enough for today, Daniel said. He stood, picked up his jacket, paused. The column on 23, he said. My final report goes to the regulatory office today. The load distribution needs to be corrected before the building takes full event capacity again. Your engineering team has the preliminary findings. They'll know what to do. She blinked at the pivot. Yes, we're all ready. Good, he said. That's my job. That part's done. He buttoned his jacket. Mr. Brooks, she said. He stopped. Your wife, she said carefully. The thing you said that she said about anger being grief that doesn't know where to go. She paused. She sounds like she was remarkable. Something moved through Daniel's face, a warmth specific and private, and not for public consumption, but real. She was, he said. She really was. He walked out. Amelia Sterling sat alone at the table with her untouched coffee gone cold, and the morning light coming through the windows of Alma's Coffee on Milwaukee Avenue, and she sat there for a long time after he left. Not thinking about the contracts, or the press, or Harold Fenn, or the board meeting scheduled for Monday. Just sitting. In the particular silence of someone who has been shown something true and is deciding what to do with it. Outside, Daniel called Janet Kowalski. I'll be there by 8:15, he said. Thanks for having her. She and Rosa are already trying to teach the dog to high five, Janet said. Take your time. He stood on the sidewalk in the November morning and let himself breathe. His phone vibrated. A number he didn't recognize, a Washington area code. He almost didn't answer. Then he did. Brooks. Mr. Brooks. A woman's voice, professional, careful. My name is Catherine Marsh. I'm a senior producer at the Washington Post. I know you've been avoiding press contact, and I want to respect that. I'm not calling to ask for an interview. I'm calling because we're running a story tomorrow morning about the Sterling Infrastructure Federal Contract Review that's been initiated, and we have confirmed your identity from 3 independent government sources. A pause. I wanted to give you the opportunity to know in advance, not to ask you anything, just to give you the heads up. Daniel stood very still. What 3 sources? He said. I can't tell you that. But I want you to know that our story is about the contract review and the structural inspection findings. Your personal history. She paused. We found significant information. We are choosing not to publish it. That was an editorial decision made at the highest level of this paper. Why? He said. Because you have a daughter, she said simply. And because some stories are more important than the ones that make the most noise. He was quiet. The story runs tomorrow at 6 a.m., she said. Your name will appear as the inspector who filed the report. Nothing more. We wanted you to know. Thank you, he said. Thank you, Mr. Brooks, she said. And there was something in her voice, careful, professional, completely genuine, that told him she was one of the people who knew. One of the people who had found the footnote, who had read page 3, who understood the specific weight of unnamed asset, and had decided quietly, and without fanfare, to be decent about it. The line ended. He put the phone in his pocket. He walked to his truck. He sat behind the wheel for a moment and thought about Claire. About the way she used to say that the world was mostly good people doing their best in the dark. He had agreed with her in theory. He had not always believed it completely. He believed it today. He started the truck. It cleared its throat, the way it always did. That particular mechanical sound that Emma had named Harold, because she said every vehicle with a personality deserved a name. He had told her that was not how trucks worked. She had told him Harold disagreed. Harold pulled out into traffic. At 8:13, he was at the Kowalski house. At 8:15, Emma appeared at the door with Rose's dog under one arm and a triumphant expression on her face. He can high-five, she announced. Show me, he said. The dog high-fived him. He drove Emma to school. He watched her go through the door. He went to work. He filed his final structural report at 11:47 a.m. It was thorough, accurate, and complete. The load-bearing column on floor 23 of Sterling Tower required immediate corrective reinforcement. The Eastern Conference Wing should not be used for high-capacity events until the work was done. The building was otherwise sound. He filed it without a cover letter. He filed it without any additional comment. He filed it because it was his job, and his job was real and real work done. Honestly, was its own kind of answer to everything that had happened in the last 36 hours. At 2 p.m. his phone rang. Marcus Webb. The Post is running tomorrow, Marcus said. I know. They called me. A pause. They called you. To give me advance notice. They're running the contract story, not the personal history. I know, Marcus said. I made some calls. Daniel was quiet for a moment. Marcus. Before you say anything, you keep making calls on my behalf, Daniel said. Not angry, just clear. I keep having the ability to make calls on your behalf, Marcus said. Those are different things. I don't do it because I think you need me to. I do it because it's what I can do. It's the only... He stopped, steadied. It's the only thing I've ever been able to give back. Let me give it. The weight of that landed the way heavy things land when they're true. All right, Daniel said. The contract review is going to take 30 days. Marcus continued back to business. Sterling Infrastructure will likely have to accept a modified agreement with additional oversight provisions. Amelia Sterling won't be criminally charged. The DA's office determined that a private incident with no formal complaint from the victim. I'm not filing a complaint, Daniel said. I know, that's why. A pause. She's going to survive this professionally. Diminished. Changed maybe, but she'll survive it. Good, Daniel said. Another pause. You mean that? I mean it, Daniel said. I don't want her destroyed. I want her different. Marcus Webb said nothing for a long moment. Pete cried on the way home yesterday, he said finally. He called me from his car, and he was crying. He wanted me to tell you that. Tell him, Daniel started. Tell him yourself, Marcus said. Come to Washington. Bring Emma. There are people here who would very much like to meet the daughter of the man who... Not yet, Daniel said. Maybe someday. Not yet. Okay, Marcus said. Okay. Marcus. Yeah. Thank you. For the calls. For yesterday. For all of it. He paused. Tell Grace happy birthday when it comes. What month? A long silence. February, Marcus Webb said in the voice of someone who has just been shown something they didn't expect. February 14th. Of course, Daniel said. Valentine's baby. Yeah, Marcus said quietly. My wife says she planned it that way. I tell her that's biologically impossible. She tells me I'm wrong. She's probably right, Daniel said. Probably, Marcus said. And for the first time in 2 days, both men were almost laughing. He hung up. He drove home. Hi, Maud, dinner. Spaghetti the kind Emma liked with the sauce from the jar that she insisted tasted better than homemade, even though he knew from every objective standard that it did not. He made it anyway. He made it because she loved it, and because love was frequently irrational, and that was not a flaw, but a feature. She told him about Rosa and the dog, and Jacob Reiner's deep-sea fish book, which she had returned as promised, and which Jacob Reiner, had she reported, been very understanding about. He listened. The apartment was warm. The city was outside. The video was somewhere out there in the digital space replicating itself, telling a story to people who hadn't been there. People in Ohio and Florida and Texas and places he'd never been. People who were watching 14 seconds of footage and feeling something they couldn't entirely name. Something about dignity and control, and what it meant to be a father, and what it meant to be seen, and what it meant to choose stillness in a world that kept insisting on noise. He didn't think about the video. He thought about the book. She reached for the handle, he read, and the moment her fingers closed around the cool brass of it, she understood whatever was on the other side had been waiting for her for a very long time. Emma was asleep in 4 pages. He sat with the book in his lap in the quiet apartment. He thought about tomorrow, about the Post article, about what would happen next. He thought about Claire. I thought about her saying the world is mostly good people doing their best in the dark. He set this book on the coffee table. He turned off the light. He sat in the dark for a moment, not afraid, not bracing, just present, just here in this apartment in Logan Square, with its blue blanket and its borrowed library books and its daughter asleep down the hall. And he was in the way that truly mattered completely all right. The Washington Post article went live at 6:03 in the morning. Daniel knew because his phone started vibrating at 6:04 and did not stop. I was already awake. He had been awake since 5:15, sitting at the kitchen counter with his coffee and the particular quiet of a man who knows something is coming and has made his peace with it. He picked up the phone, read the headline, Federal Contractor, Under Review, After CEO, Assault on Inspector, and read the first 3 paragraphs, which named him, described his role, summarized the structural findings, and said nothing, not a single word about Hartwell or military service or unnamed assets or 11 hours in the dark. Catherine Marsh had kept her word. He set the phone face down on the counter. Hi, Mudda, Emma's lunch. Turkey sandwich, the crusts cut off because she was 8 and 8-year-olds had strong feelings about crusts. An apple. A small bag of the pretzels she liked. And the drawing the small duck on a folded square of paper that he tucked inside the bag, because it made her laugh at lunchtime, and because it was Tuesday, and Tuesday was a duck day. He didn't have a system for which days were which animal. He just drew whatever felt right in the morning, and apparently Tuesday felt like a duck. I was sealing the bag when Emma appeared in the kitchen doorway in her pajamas. She looked at him. At the phone face down on the counter. At his face. Number 11 again, she said. Closer to a 7 today, he said. She climbed onto the stool. He slid her orange juice across the counter. She drank it without being asked, which was unusual enough that he noticed. The article came out, he said, about what happened at the building. Is it bad? No, it's fair. She considered that. Are people going to know who you are now? Some people already do, he said. More will now. Is that okay? He thought about the honest answer. It's not what I would have chosen, he said. But I think it's going to be okay. Yes. She nodded the way she nodded when she was filing information away for later processing. Will they leave us alone? I think so, eventually. But not today. Probably not today, he agreed. She reached over and took the folded paper duck out of her lunch bag, unfolded it, looked at it, refolded it, and put it back. Good duck, she said. Thank you, he said. They ate breakfast. He drove her to school. He watched her go through the door. He sat in the parking lot and let 3 journalists' calls go to voicemail in the space of 4 minutes. Then he drove to work. The morning moved fast. His supervisor called at 8:30, a man named Greg Paulson, who had been doing structural oversight for the city for 22 years, and who expressed his support by saying in a completely flat voice, "Your report on Sterling Tower is being used as a training example. Don't let it go to your head," and then hanging up before Daniel could respond. He sat with that for a moment and decided it was the nicest thing Greg had ever said to him. The phone kept going. Former colleagues. A man named Terry from the state licensing board who just wanted to say he saw the video and was proud to have his name in the same professional organization. A woman named Dr. Sylvia Park from the University of Chicago School of Engineering, who left a voicemail asking if he would consider speaking to her structural safety seminar in the spring. No pressure completely. His call. He returned none of them. He returned one call. Pete Galloway, 10:17 a.m. It rang twice. "Hey," Pete said. "Hey," Daniel said. "You see the post?" "Yeah." "They did right by you." "They did," Daniel said. "Marcus make calls about that too." "I might have sent an email," Pete said. Not apologetic, just honest. Daniel almost said something about people making calls and sending emails on his behalf without being asked. He decided not to. He had made that point. It had been heard. And the truth was that these men, Pete Galloway, Marcus Webb, Colonel Reyes, people connected by a night 8 years ago, that none of them talked about, they weren't doing it to manage him. They were doing it because it was the only language they had for a debt that couldn't be paid in any other currency. He understood that now in a way he hadn't 2 days ago. "How's Grace?" he said. He heard Pete's breath change, just slightly. "She's great. She started walking last month. Just took off. No crawling, no wobbling. Just decided one day she was done with the ground and went vertical." A pause. "My wife sent me a video of her this morning. She walks like she owns the place." "Good," Daniel said. "That's exactly right." "Daniel," Pete said. His voice shifted. Steadier now, more deliberate, the voice of a man saying something he rehearsed and then threw away the rehearsal for. "I know you don't want to be made into something. I know you just want to go home and be Emma's dad and do your job and have nobody bother you. I know that. I respect it completely." "But," Daniel said, "but you did something 8 years ago that changed the shape of my life. And I've been carrying the weight of not being able to say that to your face for 8 years. And I need you to let me say it now, even if you don't want to hear it, even if it makes you uncomfortable, even if you tell me to stop." He paused. "You saved my life. I would not have seen my daughter walk. I would not have been there. And I know you don't think about it that way. I know it was just what needed doing. I know that's who you are. But it matters. What you did matters. You matter. And I needed you to hear that from me directly." The line was quiet. A truck went past on the street outside. Daniel pressed his thumb and forefinger against the bridge of his nose. "I hear you," he said. "Good," Pete said. His voice was rough at the edges. "Good." "Tell Grace she walks right," Daniel said. Pete laughed. Short reel slightly undone. "I will." "Take care of yourself, Pete." "You too, man. You too." He hung up. He sat in his truck for a moment. Then he got out and went back to work because the work was there and it was real and it needed doing, and that was always in the end the correct answer. By noon, the video had crossed 5 million views. By 2 p.m., 3 separate media organizations had correctly identified him by name, aggregating public records and professional licensing information. His name was now fully public. Daniel Brooks, Structural Safety Inspector, Logan Square, Chicago. Father of 1. Former, and here the reporting became appropriately vague, citing anonymous sources who described his background in general terms without specifics. Decorated service record. Left voluntarily. Raises his daughter alone. The internet did what it did with stories like this. It loved him. loudly immediately with the specific fervor that people reserve for moments when someone shows them something they want to believe is still possible. Dignity, restraint, the particular grace of a man who could have done damage and chose not to. He didn't read the comments. He had made that decision at noon, and he held it. He was at the school at 3:10. Exactly. Emma came through this door and crossed the sidewalk and stopped in front of him. "Jacob Reiner said you're famous," she reported. "Jacob Reiner should focus on math," Daniel said. "He's very good at math. Then he should do more of it." She fell into step beside him. "Rosa's mom cried when she saw the video. She said you were a hero. I told her you were my dad, which is different." He looked down at her. "Is it?" "Well, yeah," Emma said, as if this were obvious. "Heroes are in stories. Dads are real." He stopped walking. She stopped too, looking up at him with those dark eyes that were her mother's, clear and direct and entirely without guile. He crouched down to her level. "Emma," he said. "Yeah. Your mom would be so proud of you." She looked at him for a moment. Then she put both arms around his neck and held on, and he held her back on the sidewalk outside her school in Logan Square on a cold November afternoon, with the city going about its business all around them, and he held her with the specific, careful strength of a man who has learned the difference between the things worth fighting for and the things worth simply holding. "I know," she said into his shoulder. "She tells me sometimes." He pulled back, looked at her. "In dreams." "Sometimes," she said. "Sometimes just when I'm thinking," she considered. "Is that weird?" "No," he said. "That's not weird at all." She nodded, picked up her backpack properly on both shoulders this time, without the lopsidedness of borrowed books. "Can we have spaghetti again?" "We had it yesterday." "I know. I liked it." "We can have it again," he said. They walked to the truck. What happened next, Daniel did not anticipate. He had been managing the situation, the calls, the voicemails, the article, the video, the professional consequences, with the methodical calm of a man who had been trained to manage situations to assess and respond rather than react. He had felt in control of the variables he could control. He had accepted the variables he couldn't. He had not calculated for Amelia Sterling to be standing next to his truck. She was alone. No assistance, no security. Her hands were in the pockets of her dark coat, and she looked like someone who had driven here themselves and parked somewhere and walked over and was now aware that she might have made a mistake, but had decided to stay anyway. Emma saw her first. Her hand tightened in Daniel's. Amelia Sterling looked at Emma. Something crossed her face. Complicated private, the expression of someone looking at a mirror they didn't know was a mirror. She looked at Daniel. "I'm sorry to come here. I know you didn't ask for this." Emma was looking up at Daniel. He could feel her reading the situation with the precise sensitivity she had for anything involving his emotional state. "It's all right," he said. To Emma, "Bug, can you wait in the truck? Just for a minute." Emma looked at Amelia Sterling. She looked at her father. Then she looked at Amelia again. "Are you going to be mean to my dad?" she said. The directness of it hit the air like a clean note. Amelia Sterling's jaw moved. Something in her face opened, not broke, but opened the way a thing opens when it finally stops being sealed. "No," she said. Her voice was steady. "I'm not. I'm going to try very hard to be the opposite of that." Emma studied her for one more moment with those clear, unsparing eyes. "Okay," she said. She looked at Daniel. "I'll be in the truck." She climbed in. Daniel heard the door close. He turned to Amelia. "You shouldn't be here," he said. Not harshly, just truthfully. "I know," she said. "I drove here 3 times and left twice. The 3rd time I stayed because I realized that leaving was about what was comfortable for me. And I've been doing things based on what's comfortable for me for a very long time, and I'm trying to stop." She took a breath. "I won't come to the school again. I wanted to say one thing, and I wanted to say it here, because the last time I saw you here was the moment that started all of this, and I wanted—" She stopped. "I wanted to close the loop somewhere honest." He waited. "I spoke to my board this morning," she said. I accepted a voluntary reduction in my operational authority pending the contract review. I'm bringing in an independent ethics oversight committee. The company will remain functional, but my direct control will be limited for the review period." She paused. "I did that not because I was forced to. I did it because it's the right consequence for bad leadership, and I've spent long enough in rooms where no one tells me what the right consequence is." She met his eyes. "I also initiated the school endowment. Anonymous. Irrevocably structured so that no one at Sterling, including me, can attach any branding or conditions to it at any point. The school will receive the funding as an unrestricted gift from an unnamed donor, permanently." He looked at her for a long moment. "How much?" he said. "Enough that they won't have to run a fundraiser for classroom supplies for the next 20 years, she said. Something moved in his face. Fast, private, then contained. "All right," he said. "That's not what I drove here to say, though," she said. "The endowment, that's just the right thing to do, and it doesn't need gratitude." She paused. "What I came here to say is I've been thinking about what you told me, about your wife, about anger being grief that doesn't know where to go." She stopped, steadied. "I lost my father when I was 11. He was a construction worker, actually. Nothing like what I built. He worked with his hands, and he came home every night tired, and he was the kindest man I ever knew. And when he died, I was so angry. For so long. And I think at some point, I made a decision. I don't think it was a conscious decision. I think it was the kind of decision you make in the dark, without knowing you're making it. I decided that soft things got taken from you. That kindness was a liability. That if you were powerful enough, nothing could be taken." She looked at her hands. "And then I stood in that hallway, and I looked at a man in a work jacket who was patient and calm and completely at peace with who he was, and my first instinct was to destroy that, because it threatened something." She looked up. "I don't fully understand yet what it threatened, but I'm going to figure it out, and I'm going to do the work." She paused. "I thought you should know that, not for forgiveness, just so that what happened meant something more than a bad moment and a news cycle." Daniel stood with that. The cold air moved around them. A car went past. Someone's dog barked half a block away. The truck behind him idled quietly, Harold waiting. "Your father sounds like he was a good man," Daniel said. Amelia Sterling's composure shifted, just slightly, something behind her eyes. "He was the best person I knew," she said. "Then you already know what real power looks like," Daniel said. "You saw it every day for 11 years. You just forgot." He paused. "You can remember." She pressed her lips together, nodded. Once. He nodded back. He walked to the truck. He opened the door. He stopped. "Ms. Sterling." She turned. "My daughter's name is Emma," he said. "She lost her first front tooth 2 months ago on a piece of caramel. She names vehicles she likes. She checks out library books through unofficial channels and considers this a flexible interpretation of the rules rather than a violation." He paused. "She is the best person I know. If your endowment helps her school, then some good came out of a bad day. That matters. You should let it matter." Amelia Sterling stood on the sidewalk in Logan Square and looked at a man in a worn jacket telling her something true. And she did not have a speech for this moment, and she did not reach for one. She just nodded. Daniel got in the truck. Emma was looking at him. "What did she say?" "She apologized again," he said. "Is she going to keep doing that?" "I think she's going to stop talking and start doing," he said. "Which is better." Emma considered this. "Did you forgive her?" He started the truck. Harold cleared his throat. "Not yet," he said. "But I think I might, eventually." "What does it feel like?" Emma asked. "When you forgive someone?" He pulled into traffic. He thought about it seriously, the way he thought about anything she asked seriously. "I think it feels like putting something down," he said. "Something you've been carrying. Not because they deserve to have you stop carrying it, but because you're tired and your arms are full of better things." Emma was quiet for a moment. "Your arms are full of me," she said. "That's right," he said. So there's no room. That's exactly right. She nodded with great satisfaction and looked out the window at the city going past. They had spaghetti. He read to her. The girl with the library door was 3 chapters from the end, now moving through a world made of books, discovering that the world on the other side of the door was not a refuge from the real world, but a way of seeing it more clearly. Emma was very invested in the outcome. She had opinions about the ending that she had shared and that he had listened to without spoiling it, because he had read ahead at 1 a.m. on a night 2 weeks ago when he couldn't sleep, and he knew how it ended, and he thought she was going to love it. She fell asleep 4 pages from the finish. He sat with the book. He thought about the last 48 hours. The sequence of them. The hallway. The ice cream. The federal building. The coffee shop. The school pickup. The sidewalk conversation with a woman who was finding her way back to something she'd lost when she was 11 years old. He thought about Pete Galloway's daughter named Claire. He thought about Marcus Webb in a Washington building saying, "I know. Let's go." He thought about Colonel Reyes on a personal phone line in the early morning saying your instincts are fine. He thought about Janet Kowalski at his door with foil-covered lasagna. He thought about a journalist who chose not to run a story because he had a daughter, and some stories were more important than the ones that made the most noise. He thought about Claire, the real Claire, his Claire. He thought about her the way he did every night before sleep, not with grief as the primary feeling. Not anymore. Not after 4 years, but with the quieter feeling that lived on the other side of grief when you had done the work of it. Gratitude. For the time. For Emma. For the specific luck of having been loved by someone who believed the world was mostly good people doing their best in the dark. He set the book down. He checked on Emma. She was asleep on her back with her mouth slightly open and her arms at her sides in the particular arrangement of children who have committed entirely to unconsciousness. He pulled the blanket up. The one with the hole in the corner that was a feature now, not a flaw. He went back to the living room. His phone was on the coffee table. He had 17 unread messages and 4 voicemails and a notification that someone had created a social media account called Justice for Daniel Brooks that had acquired 80,000 followers in 6 hours. He looked at all of this information. He turned the phone face down. I was not Justice for Daniel Brooks. He was Daniel Brooks, Inspector Logan Square, Chicago, father of 1, duck drawer, spaghetti maker, reader of books about library doors, man who drove a truck named Harold and bought 2 scoop ice cream for $6 a scoop without counting the cost. I was all of those things, and they were enough. They had always been enough. The world had spent 48 hours deciding he was significant, and he appreciated the sentiment, and he understood why the moment had captured something people needed to see. But significance was not the thing. It had never been the thing. The thing was 310 at the school gate. The thing was the duck. The thing was the blue blanket with the hole that was a feature. 3 weeks after the video, the Sterling Tower column had been fully reinforced. Daniel filed the completion verification and closed the case. He received a departmental commendation, which Greg Paulson presented to him in the same flat voice with which he delivered all information, and which Daniel received with a straight face, and then spent 4 minutes not laughing about in the parking lot. 6 weeks after the video, Emma's school received notification of an anonymous endowment. The principal called Daniel mystified and delighted. He told her he didn't know anything about it. This was technically true in the sense that he had not arranged it and did not know the exact figures and had not been consulted on the structure. The principal seemed to find his response somewhat unconvincing, but decided not to press it. The school got new science lab equipment. A reading specialist on full salary for 3 years. The classroom supply budget tripled. Rosa's mom cried again. Emma reported this with great interest. 8 weeks after the video, Amelia Sterling gave an interview. Not about Daniel. She declined every question about the incident except to say that she had caused harm and was accountable for it, and that the details were between her and the person she'd harmed. What she talked about for 40 minutes was leadership. What it looked like when it was real. The difference between authority and power. A story about her father, a construction worker, the kindest man she had ever known, and what she had forgotten and was trying to remember. The interview was widely read. Several comment sections which she had been advised not to look at, and looked at anyway, noted that she sounded different. Changed. Fewer said it was real. More said it was PR. Time, she had decided, was the only thing that would answer that question, and she was prepared to wait. Daniel read the interview on a Thursday evening after Emma was asleep. He read it once carefully, in the way he read structural reports, looking for what was actually there rather than what he wanted to see. What he found was a woman working. Imperfectly. Publicly. With the particular exposure of someone who has decided to stop hiding inside their own architecture. He set his phone down. He thought good. That was all. Just good. Simply and without complication. Because it was enough. 3 months after the video, on a Saturday in February, with Chicago buried in 6 inches of new snow. Daniel drove Emma to the park with the sled that was 2 years old and slightly cracked on the right runner from the time Emma had launched it off a small jump she had constructed without consulting anyone and landed in a way that was fine for Emma and fatal for the sled's structural integrity. He had repaired it with epoxy, and it worked perfectly well, structurally sound, if slightly asymmetric, which Emma felt gave it personality. They were at the top of the hill, and Emma was situated on the sled, and he was preparing to push when his phone buzzed. He looked at it. A text from Marcus Webb. A photo. A little girl in a red coat standing in snow in what appeared to be a Washington yard, arms out for balance, grinning the gap-toothed grin of a 14-month-old on unstable terrain. The caption read, "She walks like she owns the place. Happy February, Daniel. We're glad you're here." He looked at the photo for a moment. He typed back, "She does. You tell her that." He put the phone in his pocket. "Dad," Emma said with some urgency. "I'm going to get cold." "Sorry, bug." He got behind the sled, put his hands on her shoulders. "Ready." "Born ready," she said, which was something she had heard somewhere and had been deploying in situations that called for it. "Here we go," he said. He pushed. She went over the hill with a shriek of pure joy, the cracked red sled carving its slightly asymmetric path through the fresh snow. Emma's arms out at her sides, the yellow scarf he'd tied around her neck streaming behind her, and she made it all the way to the bottom without tipping, which was not always how it went. She turned around at the bottom and looked up at him. "Perfect," she shouted. "That was perfect." He raised one hand. She grabbed the sled rope and started climbing back up. He stood at the top of the hill and watched her come, this 8-year-old in a yellow scarf climbing toward him with her mother's eyes and her own extraordinary, unteachable heart. And he thought about the structural report he would file on Monday and the book they would finish tonight and the duck he would draw tomorrow morning without knowing yet which animal Tuesday would want to be. He thought about Claire, the way she lived in him, not as a wound anymore, but as a compass, pointing always toward what mattered, pointing toward this, a snowy hill, a cracked sled, a daughter who walked up like she owned the place. He thought about all of it, every piece, the 48 hours that had shaken the world's attention toward him and then released it because attention was weather. It moved, it changed, it went where it was needed next. He was still here. I was always still here. That was the whole answer. That had always been the whole answer. Emma reached the top of the hill, breathless and pink-cheeked, dragging the sled behind her. "Again," she said. "Again," he agreed. And Daniel Brooks, inspector, father-man of no particular fame, and every kind of importance, stood at the top of a snow-covered hill in Chicago, and pushed his daughter into the clean, cold air, and knew with the specific and unshakable certainty of a man who understood exactly what he was standing on, that this was solid ground. This had always been solid ground. And nothing, not a slap in a hallway, not a viral video, not the weight of a past that would have broken someone smaller, nothing had ever actually moved it.